What is going on, everyone? This is Ippsec, and I hope you've been enjoying the Hack the Box University CTF 2023 talks. This is going to be the final talk. It is titled Going Beyond Root for Fun and Foundations. I guess there's fun and profit as well. This is definitely something you can make a career out of, but if you go for the profit, it's probably not going to be as fun. You really should just focus on the fun and foundations, and this talk's going to be about how to do that, right? And if you don't know what Beyond Root is, it's kind of a term me and OXDF have coined that says when you do a challenge, you get root, you get the flag, that's only like halfway done with the challenge. There's so much more you can do to explore that, right? That is the Beyond Root. And it's so important to do this, especially if you didn't like the challenge, because you don't want to end on a negative, because every time you end on that negative, there's a less chance you come back to it. It's horrible for motivation, right? So an example, a long time ago, port knocking was super big in these type of challenges. And I hated that. That's just you send 3 magic packets and a 4th port opens up and you get access to a service. So a Beyond Root would be you find a file disclosure and then you start looking at the file system. You could just look at etsy.nocd.conf and chances are you'd find the configuration there, but I hate targeting the recon that way. I poked a lot around the /proc system and discovered I could like brute force running processes by going to like /proc / the PID like 1 /CMD line and just go through 1 through 1,000. I also found like there's a file in proc called sketch_debug that lists some running services that you could get it from. And then the challenge became much better. I didn't like the port knocking aspect, but I recognized it taught me something valuable in the recon game, and I came away from that with a positive experience. So that is going to be the emphasis of this talk and convincing you to try to give like my way of learning a try, I guess. So let's look at the agenda, right? We're going to do the introduction. Who I am? Well, I'm Ippsec. I do a lot of videos. You probably found me on YouTube. I am a training lab architect at Hack the Box. I still don't know what my responsibilities are. I float around all the departments, sometimes help out create content, help like test the machines, do things. I float around all the departments and just try to bring value, right? So this talk, we're going to have 3 main things we talk about: self-paced learning issues, setting goals too high or unrealistic. We talked about not setting them for money, the overdependence on course or just one type of learning, right? If you just learn through playing dedicated labs and just doing black box challenges, it's also not efficient. You want to mix things up and learn different ways. And as you learn, you want to make sure you relate things in your mind and build some type of internal map so you have better recall and memorization. Or memorization is a bad word. Just you have better recall and just foundations. Then we're going to go on and focus on the primitives, which could also be foundations. That just shows like how we can keep things simple, how we understand exploits when we don't understand everything, and just the value of learning how to do troubleshooting. And then at the end, we're going to wrap it up by saying, make all the mistakes, because every mistake is a learning opportunity. I learn more from my failures than my successes. So whenever I make a mistake, I'm happy about it and try changing that mindset. So obviously, opinions ahead. This may not work for you. It works for me. Chances are everything I say won't work for you. So just take and leave what you want, right? So let's get into it. Why this talk? Well, cybersecurity is all about learning curves. Everything's going to seem impossible until it isn't. Learning how to train can ease the pain. The pain's never going to go away, but as long as you have realistic expectations and you know how to do foundational things, I think you're going to succeed. A bad example of a goal or a bad goal would be you're doing the CTF this weekend and you want to be like a top 5 finisher. I say that's a bad goal because realistically, the top 5 is a very small percent. There's a good chance you won't meet that goal. You should just say, I'm going to complete a few challenges, or I'm going to mark down all the new things I've learned, all the new technologies I got acquainted with. At the end of the CTF, even if you don't place well, you'll be surprised by all the new things that you were acquainted with, right? So that's going to be the goal of this talk, is just kind of teaching you how to consume this content, because this is self-paced learning. We don't have a manager or teacher telling us exactly what to learn, which is good because there's guides on absolutely everything. If I wanted to pivot away from InfoSec and try to fix my car, I can probably find a guide on YouTube exactly to like the model of car and fixing the problem I have, right? If I don't want to do video content, I can probably find a Medium blog or website that has it in text format, right? And if I don't want to do text or YouTube, I can easily socialize. There's probably a Discord community around what I want. The Hack the Box Discord is definitely great. And then with self-paced learning, it's easy to prove you have that knowledge with certificates, right? But with all good does come bad things. And it's important to recognize the pitfalls so you can avoid them, right? There's guides on absolutely everything, which kind of puts you in this weird limbo state of tutorial hell where you spend more time trying to start to learn than actually starting, right? You want to find the most optimal way, the most optimal course to learn that thing. And you'll spend like an hour or two trying to find a good path, then get demotivated, stop, play a game, and then come back to it multiple days later, and you'll just be where you started. Where if you just started right away, acknowledging this may not be the most optimal, but we're going to see how it goes, you'd be in a better spot, right? The other thing is a lot of courses, videos will focus on hype or clickbait, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But if you just say, I'm going to learn all these SQL payloads, but don't have the foundational knowledge of how to use SQL, you're not going to be that successful, right? A lot of the videos like showing the full complete thing instead of all the troubleshooting and just foundational things that go into it. So that can be a problem. Also, most courses are designed to work. So again, you're not going to have a lot of troubleshooting research, things like that. Like it's going to give you this exact flow of how you're supposed to do, some commands to copy and paste, and you won't be able to make typos because you copy and pasted. So the courses are designed to work. If you don't go outside of that course and apply your knowledge and think about other things, you're not going to do a great job building your foundation, right? Also, because it's so easily to socialize, it's so easy to be negative. In video games, I came across like more pew pew, less QQ. And what that means is if the game is giving you something that's frustrating, you think it's unfair, it's easy for you to dismiss that and just say the game is bad, other than saying, oh, I understand the problem. This is how I'm going to tackle it. I know it's not a great situation, but I can overcome it, right? You want to spend more time doing, less time complaining. And if you just socialize a lot, it's easy to get into this like negative feedback loop where you spend so much time complaining, you don't ever do work or don't do as much work as you should. And then the last thing is like if you try to collect all the certs and just like study for the exam, try to find how to pass this exam instead of just learning the material, it becomes more about consuming than enjoyment. And when that happens, you're not really enjoying the material. A good example of this, because I like relating everything to other things, right? That's how I think learning is best. So there was a discussion on Mistborn subreddit. If you don't know what Mistborn is, it's just a fantasy novel by Brandon Sanderson. And someone was complaining about a lot of things that they just didn't get. And it came to fruition that they were listening to it on Audible at 2.5 times the speed because they wanted to get through of it. And it was like, you're just consuming the book. Like, why'd you pay for it? You should enjoy it. It's like 20 hours for this book and you consumed it in 8 hours. Of course, you don't have a full understanding, right? So don't speed through it. Don't make it a game of collect them all. Just make sure your goals are realistic. Don't go for like 6 certs in a year. Make it like 2, right? Because at that level, you can actually enjoy what you are learning instead of just trying to get all the titles. So self-paced learning, you can become over-dependent on it. Courses are great. They teach a lot, but they don't build endurance or stamina, right? Like I said before, not everything's going to work out of the box. If all you're used to is things working, when it doesn't work, you give up and you say it's not a vulnerability or you move on, when it may have just been a simple typo or that it was configured slightly different, right? It's really hard to teach people good troubleshooting and research. That's what makes a good engineer. That's where experience definitely helps. So you want to make sure you always are trying to build on that type of skill in the troubleshooting research. And also, it's hard to multitask in a course because it's going to give you an exact path that you go down and you just go down that path. You're not running tools in the background to get more information, right? And that definitely helps when you come to test a lot of apps and just know when to move on from a rabbit hole, right? I'm looking at this field. I think it's a server-side template injection. I spent 30 minutes on it. And if I wasn't running recon in the background, I don't really ever not focus on that SSTI that I think it is. Whereas if I was running recon in the background, I may discover a new host, a new technology, a new something that catches my interest. I can move on from that. Maybe it wasn't exploitable. Maybe it was. I'll come back to it when I have some more knowledge of the web app, and maybe that fills a missing hole, right? So those three things are very important: troubleshooting, research, and multitasking. Um, and if you have all those, that'll help you build strong foundations, because memorization and flowcharts is not going to be enough for this field. Too many times I see people say, I'm going to run this tool. It's going to say do this or give me this information, which then I'm going to run it to this tool. It's going to say this and this and this and this. And you just kind of build this big flowchart of just things to do. It's hard to keep that maintained. At least it is for me. Maybe that's just not how I work. I think people do that though, because there's an unrealistic expectation of knowing everything in this field. And to the untrained eye, it looks like everyone here is a jack of all trades, master of everything, right? If you watch my videos, there's a good chance I come across that way. But most of the time, I'm learning as I go. Like in a video, even if it's an easy box, there's a good chance I learned something while recording or 24 hours before recording. And if that box was insane, there's probably a 25% chance within 48 hours of recording the video, I wanted to give up because I just did not think I was going to get the material in a way I could explain it, right? So definitely just try to focus on foundations because it helps you learn things, right? Before we go into like a tech topic, let's talk about like driving, I guess. If I wanted to drive to the community college by me, I don't know all the turns to make off the top of my head. I don't know like any street names outside of where I live. But as I'm driving, I get more sensory input from just the place around me, and I can remember all the turns to make when I get close to that turn, right? And that's why I value building a foundation, because I'm not going to understand all the exploits. I don't understand every programming language, but I start relating them to things I do understand, and it makes it look like I know what I'm doing, right? So earlier in this talk, OXDF talked about a phishing challenge, and it started with a phishing payload that was an ISO file. But let's just draw this, and this is going to be a treasure map. I'm going to put an X here, and this is going to be the payload, right? If we forgot that, we're just left with the treasure map. We don't have any way to help us get back to where we were, right? But if this was a ISO file, and we're doing the forensic investigation, we could just go straight to the executable, do analysis there, and move on, right? There's a lot of questions it probably didn't ask us. And whenever I do this, I would relate it to things like, why is the attacker sending an ISO? That's probably a mark of the web thing. Mark of the web, if you don't know, it's like a bit that gets sent on files that get downloaded from the internet that just tells the operating system it came from the internet and it doesn't trust it. But if a Word document isn't an ISO, there's a chance that the Word document didn't get that mark of the web because the system didn't flip that bit there. It just flipped it on the ISO. So when they open it up, a macro may execute, right? So that's one potential thing. Another thing they could do it for is, let's say, some type of filtering, right? They're filtering executables on web so you can't send them anything. And yes, my handwriting here is horrible, trying a new thing. But there's some type of filtering in play. So the ISO may let them get an executable to the user's workstation. Also, upon filtering, there could be a policy. And by policy, I mean maybe the workstation won't execute files out of downloads. But because it was an ISO file, it mounted as, like, let's say the D drive. They click the executable. The system no longer thinks it's in downloads because it's in D, and then it runs, right? I'm building all these connections, thinking about it, trying to think about more when I read other people's write-ups. That's what I'm trying to find out, if they said anything I didn't know about the ISO, because a few weeks down the line, I am going to forget that it came from an ISO, but now my treasure map still has things, right? I'm thinking about it, mark of the web, filtering, probably was an ISO. It could have been a zip, but zip probably won't bypass some type of policy. So now I'm just remembering all these things and remembering this chain, right? Let's say, let's get away from the forensic aspect. I'm just trying to erase everything here. And let's go with a, I don't know, we'll talk about a PHP exploit, right? It was a SSTI that we did, server-side template injection. So we'll put SSTI here. That is horrible, but we'll go with it. And when I'm thinking about this, I don't know much about PHP SSTI, but I know it's a template. I know a lot of Python, and I know Jinja 2 pretty well, right? So I can relate it to that. And when I Google, I can Google for Python things, translate it to PHP because PHP SSTI, it's probably going to be Blade, right? I think that's the language. And if I can remember these things when I'm having trouble doing something, I now can Google, this is how I would do it in Jinja 2. How do I do it in Blade? I don't Google the exploit. I just Google the foundational technologies it's built upon and then find someone explaining it and filling in the gaps, right? So again, I just try to go through this. Another thing we go with SSTI, I would think fuzzing parameters, right? We send 2 squiggly brackets to the server, it vomits. That tells me it's SSTI because I could be thinking PHP, SQL, and we go with a single quote, right? I'm just trying to build all these relations. And when I see it behaves oddly to 2 double brackets, I'm going to SSTI, right? I'm not trying to build a flow chart of run this tool, see this, do this, do this. I'm just trying to build it upon a lot of technologies, relating it. So when I see something, my brain tries to draw a map back to what it is. Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully I don't become into like this guy, right? Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I just want to include that meme here. So I do think the foundations, trying to link things definitely helps with recalling. And when you run into a problem, you know more about what to Google to get out of that problem. So the other thing that helps is exploit primitives. Maybe this is foundations, maybe primitive is a bad word, but very rarely is an exploit or technology really fully unique, right? Everything relates to something somehow. Uber relates to taxi drivers, right? It's just a different way of hailing the taxi. So I always try to break any type of exploit or technology into as many pieces as I can understand. For example, privilege escalations love elevated file rates. It's not always going to be the case, but I like knowing all the ways as an admin user, if I write a file, I can get code execution, right? In Windows, that's like writing a DLL to C:\Windows System 32. Linux, it could be like writing an SSH key, a cron job, things like that, because a lot of the exploits are based around tricking a program that's running as admin to write a file. And as a defender, if I can just detect that file right, then I can potentially detect exploits I don't know about, right? Someone just tricked my Cisco VPN client to write a config, which was a DLL to C:\System 32. I don't have a lot of monitoring around Cisco VPN, but I do have monitoring around my System 32 directory, so I can discover that O-day without actually knowing the exploit. That's what people mean by saying detect the technique, not the exploit or the tool. Another thing is like deserialization. All these exploits look complicated. I've exploited a lot of Java applications, and I don't fully understand the whole attack chain, right? I just know how to detect it and how to build a payload. I don't know what that payload actually is. I just feed it to YSO serial. It gives me something. I build an exploit script. It looks like I know what I'm doing, but really, it's a lot of copy and pasting code, right? When it comes to binary exploitation challenges, a lot of it just really revolves to getting to a known state. I'm not good at solving Rubik's Cubes, but I'm told that a lot of people don't have every pattern memorized. They just know how to get the Rubik's Cube into a state, and then from that state, they know how to solve it, right? They're trying to get a color to a certain spot because if they do, they know how to move it and solve the cube, right? It's just playing around with it, getting it to a state you know, so you can exploit it. Earlier in this talk, I think it was Zayed, the advanced web exploitation, or this conference, not this talk, but a few hours ago, Zayed talked about like doing command injection and leaking the results one character at a time blindly, right? And that was something that was somewhat new to me. I've never really done that on a shell command, but I related it to an SQL database and fully understand what was happening, right? If you don't know, let's say we can do a giant if-then statement on a specific character, right? We're running this command. It gives us a string. We just say, give us the first character and then ask it questions. If the letter was H, of course, we could just brute force and say, is it A, is it B, is it C, is it D, is it E, right? And just go through the list until it's H and move on. But that's not really efficient. A lot of the applications will either take 2 approaches. The first I call divide and conquer. I don't know if it's correct. Some people call it binary search, but I don't think it exactly is. And that is just doing a lot of characters at once and asking questions, right? So in this, we convert the H to a character or a number, and then just ask, is it something, right? So we have the alphabet. We know it's going to be alpha, like a character. It's A through Z. So I'm going to go halfway through the alphabet and say, is this before M? The application says, yes, it is before M. So now we know, okay, it is A through M. Is it? And halfway between A through M is probably F. So we go, is it before F? The application goes no. So we go, okay, great. It is between now F and M. J is halfway between there. We ask it, is it before J? It says yes. Again, we're just eliminating half and moving on. We say, is it before H? Because at this point, it's only, I think, HFG or something. There's, I think, 3 at this point. Is it before H? No. Is it after G? Yes. And once we get to the G, there's only 2 things it could be. It's either G or H. And if it says after G, we know it was H. So we just took the results, asked it divided them halfway every time until we got to just 1. That's a lot quicker way than going through the entire alphabet. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. Another approach that I kind of just learned, I don't use this that much, but I was talking to someone, they said bit shift. I looked at the code, I couldn't understand it. And then I started relating it to what I knew, which was the divide and conquer, and I understood it, right? So instead of converting H to like its decimal form that lets us do the is it before thing and dividing every time, we convert it to binary, which is always going to be 8 bits, right? And then we go through each bit at a time, right? So we're saying, is the first bit 1? No? Okay, we know the bit 0. Is the second bit 1? Yes, we know this bit is 1. Is the third bit 1? No, it's 0. And after asking 8 questions, we know what that byte is, and we convert that byte over to a character. It's a really efficient way to brute force this one character at a time without going over the whole key space, right? And I say this because there are definitely times when one approach won't work. Maybe there's a web filter in place and your exploit script just doesn't work. So you have to know how to shift it, right, over to the other way. Or just go completely inefficient and one character at a time. But again, most SQL injection things that do binary or Boolean based will go one of these 2 patterns. And just knowing these definitely does help when you do other programming challenges. And I'm sure you can relate this to other things now that you know it. So definitely make all the mistakes, right? I didn't know bit shift. I just went and played with it. Eventually I learned it. If you don't make the mistakes, and yes, I know there's a typo in the title. I typoed that and I was like, you know what? It kind of goes with the slide, right? You just try to be the jack of all trades and you won't be the master of anything. Or you won't even be a jack of all trades. You'll just be a master of nothing. You'll be okay, or maybe a junior, right? But if you make the mistakes, you explore things, you learn, I think you easily become a jack of all trades, master of one. And I think this is the best thing. I know a lot of people don't like this whole jack of all trades thing, but think of it this way. Like, if I just focus on Python, only do Python things, I refuse to look at any other language, I'll never know what other languages do better. And that definitely helps me write better Python code, right? Before I started looking at Golang is big in error handling because you got a lot of if error equals nil type of things, right? But before I ever coded a Golang program, my Python error handling was horrible. I started with Go. I learned how to do error handling a little bit better. Then I looked at the Python way to do it with a lot of try catch and started getting better at Python, right? You want to try to experiment, try other things out, relate it to what you know, and it'll help you master the one thing you do know. And that one thing you do know, you'll be able to relate it to everything else, and things will just come to you naturally, right? That's building the foundation. So with that being said, hopefully this wasn't too rambly and you enjoyed the talk. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day, I guess.